Just over 7,200 new COVID cases in the city as the chief executive of Hospital Authority tests positive. John Lee confident the FinTech Week later this year will proceed forward as scheduled. And Queen Elizabeth's coffin will be flown to London today. Welcome to TVB News. The city reported 7,280 new COVID cases, continuing the downward trajectory over the past few days. That includes some 150 imported infections. Authorities say they need 2 more weeks to observe and decide whether the tally is really trending down. Meanwhile, the chief executive of the Hospital Authority, Tony Ko, tested positive today and is now undergoing isolation. Jackie Lin with more.
Cases suspected to carry the more transmissible BA4 or 5 Omicron subvariants account for some 77% of the city's latest COVID tally. While recent case counts have tamped down slightly, authorities say the daily tallies of 7,000 to 8,000 cases over the past few days are still a high level. Health officials say it will take around 2 weeks to gauge the trend of the pandemic.
Because of the long holiday, there could be more gatherings and social activities leading to more transmissions. And we must wait till later this week before deciding and checking whether the trend is indeed an upward one.
The 10-year-old double-jab boy who has epilepsy, a brain condition, saw his condition improve from critical to serious. He no longer needs to be on a ventilator. 10 COVID patients aged between 52 and 95 died. The youngest, a 52-year-old woman, had received 2 COVID vaccine doses. She was suffering from terminal cancer, which was determined to be the main cause of her death. Meanwhile, upwards of 2,880 cases were reported from some 990 schools after the public holiday long weekend. 10 more care homes reported a total of 24 cases. Nearly 100 close contacts have to be quarantined. Around half of them are residents from Aura Nursing Home in Kwai Chung. Among the latest officials to have tested positive is Chief Executive of the Hospital Authority, Tony Ko, who is now undergoing isolation. His last working day was yesterday. Jackie Lin, TVB News.
Despite the recent decline in the number of COVID cases in the city, Chief Executive John Lee today urged the public to remain vigilant, noting the pandemic has taken its toll on the healthcare system. Still, he's confident an international financial technology forum will proceed forward towards the end of the year as scheduled.
The city's daily COVID infections surged past the 10,000 mark at the start of the month, but in recent days, the figures went down slightly to 4 digits. Speaking ahead of the weekly Executive Council meeting this morning, John Lee said there's no room for complacency.
The government cannot turn a blind eye to these 2 very facts, that the hospital has already cut 30% of its service in order to deal with the COVID epidemic, and also the high-risk groups are under real threat to their health and to their life because vaccination rate for these high-risk groups is still unsatisfactory.
The FinTech Week, an international conference and exhibition event, is scheduled to take place in November in Hong Kong. At around the same time, Singapore will be hosting the FinTech Festival. When asked if that would result in tense competition between the 2 places, John Lee said many representatives have expressed their interest in attending the forum in Hong Kong. Meanwhile, some inbound mainland travellers said they were able to cross the border without a vaccination record. They were also able to get a temporary vaccine pass and issued a blue health code, which allows them entry to eateries and other designated premises over a 180-day period. At present, travellers from overseas countries and Taiwan must be vaccinated to enter the city. The CE today defended the arrangement.
In terms of controlling the epidemic, the mainland has the lowest risk around the world. So the risk of infection there is much lower than that in Hong Kong. And that's why in implementing the policy, we've been doing that for a long time. For the time being, given the risk level, and we have not seen any imported cases as a result of this policy.
The Health Bureau said it is considering unifying the standards for issuing the temporary vaccine pass to travellers from different parts of the world.
The Electoral Affairs Commission report on the 2022 chief executive election is out today. The report says the CE election held in May was conducted very smoothly. It adds that allowing electors from the 5 different sectors to vote in batches had facilitated the flow of the procedure. It also suggests the practice of setting up special queues for electors in need, such as the elderly, pregnant women or disabled people, should continue in future polls. As for the election committee polls, the voting time was trimmed to 9 hours from 15. The voting rate still reached 89%. The report says the shortened duration didn't dampen voting sentiment, and other polls could take the voting time frame as reference in the future. The condition of the dancers seriously injured during a concert by the boy band Mirror stabilized this afternoon. The news came as his father politely declined PCCW boss Richard Lee's offer of $10 million, saying he wouldn't accept any donations before the conclusion of the government task force's investigation. Christy Khan with details.
The injured dancer Molly, who was hit by a falling video screen during a concert at the Hong Kong Coliseum by popular boy band Mirror, has been transferred to the neurosurgical ward at Queen Elizabeth Hospital. The hospital said the dancer's condition has improved to stable from serious. Richard Lee, chairman of PCCW, the parent company of concert organizer McAville, yesterday said in a statement that he would donate $10 million to the injured dancer's family. Richard Lee added he had visited the dancer last week. The injured dancer's father, Derek Lee, later wrote on social media and responded to the statement. He extended his gratitude to all donations from different parties, including Richard Lee's offer. But he said it is too early to accept donations, noting that the concert organizers had already promised to cover his son's medical costs. Lee said his family was still waiting for the government's investigation results, adding that they wanted to know who should be held accountable for the accidents. Additionally, he emphasized that justice and dignity must be given to his son and other injured dancers. Earlier, he said doctors predicted that his son had a 5% chance of complete recovery from damaged vertebrae and nerves. In a video interview, a barrister said accepting donations may affect any ruling in future court cases, adding that the amount of compensation may be deducted. Meanwhile, the police visited multiple locations this afternoon in their investigation into the accident. According to police sources, the officers with a search warrant paid a visit to companies involved in the concert stage project and conducted a search. Christy Khan, TVB News.
Queen Elizabeth II's coffin will be flown to London today after 24 hours of lying at rest in Edinburgh's historic St Giles Cathedral. King Charles and his 3 siblings held a silent vigil for their mother there last night after a procession led the Queen's hearse through the streets of the Scottish capital. Charles is in Belfast, Northern Ireland today as part of his first UK tour as Britain's new monarch. Daniel Rowell tells us more.
Tens of thousands of mourners turned out in Edinburgh on Monday as a procession carried Queen Elizabeth II's coffin through the city's Royal Mile to the iconic St Giles's Cathedral.
I've been here for 4 hours waiting to see Her Majesty's passing. Just like to show our respect for her and all her family. She's been a wonderful queen to this country for all her reign.
It was very moving. It was very quiet. I felt very sorry for the family itself to be on show. They're very brave to do that. And I really hope and pray they can get something out of today and have a chance to mourn themselves. They were very kind to allow us to be part of their sadness.
King Charles, his sister Anne and brothers Andrew and Edward walked behind the Queen's hearse as it made its way to the cathedral. They later participated in a 10-minute vigil there. They stood with their heads bowed at the 4 sides of the coffin while members of the public filed past to pay their respects. The 4 royals left the vigil to the sound of applause from mourners lining the street. People queued up overnight to pay their respects to the monarch, whose coffin is lying at rest at the cathedral until today. The Queen's coffin will leave Scotland for the first time since her death when it is flown to London this evening and then driven to Buckingham Palace. On Wednesday, it will be taken on a gun carriage as part of a grand military procession to Westminster Hall. A period of lying in state will begin and last until September 19th. Members of the public will be allowed to process past the coffin for 24 hours a day until the morning of the funeral. The coffin will be covered by the Royal Standard flag with the sovereign's orb and sceptre placed on top. Meanwhile, King Charles is in Northern Ireland today as part of his first visits as monarch to all of the UK's constituent countries before the Queen's funeral. He is meeting senior politicians and religious leaders in Belfast and attending a service at the city's St Anne's Cathedral before returning to London. Daniel Roll, TVB News.
Still to come on tonight's news. Ukraine's president says his forces have retaken 6,000 square kilometers of land from Russian intruders. In Canada, British Columbia issues air quality warnings because of wildfires. Welcome back. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is appealing for faster delivery of weapons from the West as his forces sweep across the northeast of the country, taking back territory captured by Russia. He said up to 6,000 square kilometers of land has been retaken, thanks mainly to U.S. and allied military support. Nazvi Karim reports.
From the northeastern fronts, the world is only able to see footage filmed by Ukraine soldiers. Scenes of Ukraine's blue and yellow flags being raised in recaptured towns and civilians greeting liberating soldiers have lifted the spirits of Ukrainians, even though Russia still controls 1/5 of the country. Still, the grim realities are starting to seep into the Russian conscience. While Russian President Vladimir Putin and his senior officials have been largely silent amid what is regarded as a defeat, there are stirrings of discontent among pro-Moscow bloggers and some politicians over Putin's handling of the situation. Putin's spokesman Dmitry Peskov said the president is aware of what is happening on the ground and that the special military operation will continue until it reaches its goals. Russia has insisted that the withdrawal of troops and ceding of territory is strategic and deliberate. Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky, as expected, disagrees. In his address to the nation, he said the Russians are helpless on the battlefield and their response is to attack civilian targets, such as this strike on a police building in the city of Kharkiv, which killed at least one person. Attacks on a power station on the western outskirts of Kharkiv the previous day caused widespread blackouts in the area, but officials say around 80% of electricity has been restored. Meanwhile, the head of the UN nuclear watchdog said in Vienna that the agency has started talks with Ukraine and Russia on establishing a nuclear safety zone around the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, as shelling in the area continues to pose risk of a radiation catastrophe.
This situation is untenable. We are playing with fire. We cannot continue in a situation when we are one step away from a nuclear accident. The safety of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant is hanging by a thread. And we see that one day we repair one line only to see it go down the next day and to wonder what is going to happen. This is a situation that we are still in a position to prevent.
Nazvi Karim, TVB News.
In Canada's westernmost province of British Columbia, growing wildfires prompted air quality warnings and evacuation orders on Monday. Some 200 active wildfires are burning in the province, forcing around 1,000 people to leave their homes. In Vancouver, the province's largest city, authorities extended an air quality warning because of high concentrations of particulate matter caused by wildfire smoke. On Sunday, Vancouver recorded the worst air quality in the world. Meanwhile, a camp housing 350 workers for the Trans Mountain Oil Pipeline expansion project was evacuated, but there has been no impact on daily operations of the pipeline. U.S. President Joe Biden is launching a new initiative to encourage biotech production and research in the country, the latest move to boost domestic industry. Biden yesterday signed an executive order implementing the initiative. The initiative will seek to boost biomanufacturing in pharmaceuticals and in other industries such as agriculture, plastics and energy. So far, no investment figure has been revealed. The executive order follows CHIPS and Science Act that Biden signed last month. that provided $52 billion to subsidize the production of semiconductors, construction of new chip plants, and research and development in the United States. That legislation was intended to reduce the U.S. economy's reliance on semiconductors made overseas, particularly in Taiwan. It's also in response to greater efforts by China to develop its own chip industry. Back locally, the Housing Authority Committee revealed that around 100 buyers of the Green Form subsidized home ownership scheme had failed to complete their purchases. The scheme was originally set up to sell public housing flats at below market price to Hong Kongers who were existing public housing tenants. 2 housing projects in the scheme were opened for sale 3 years ago, but some flats are still available for sale now. Lately, around 100 applicants decided not to complete their purchases, mostly involving larger units. A member from the Housing Authority Committee suggested that the authorities should consider further reducing the price of the flats to avoid idling the public resources. How to address Hong Kong's housing shortage is a priority topic in Chief Executive John Lee's upcoming policy address. Secretary for Housing Winnie Ho said on a TVB program that there will be plans to help resolve the long-standing issue.
With the average waiting time for a public housing unit still being around 6 years, housing shortage remains one of Hong Kong's biggest challenges. Speaking on TVB's Straight Talk program, Secretary for Housing Winnie Ho said the new administration is determined to address the problem.
The average waiting time has dropped a bit from the peak of 6.1 year to 6 years. I hope that we can keep the trend. And we hope that when our housing policy was announced later, people would know the determination of the government to turn around and keep lowering this average waiting time. And so that this housing problem, we will show to the people that it's finally being managed.
Ho, an architect who's worked in the government for 30 years, said one of the driving forces behind her decision to take up the post of Housing Secretary is her determination to help the city resolve a long-standing problem.
Hong Kong is such an advanced metropolitan city. When you still see so many people living in such a poor condition, it's quite heartbroken. I talked to one elderly person. He was in his, I think, 70s. Mm-hmm. He has just a bed, and his whole entire home is on the bed. He has been a construction worker, worked in the restaurant as a caretaker. He did contribute to this city, right? Mm. He has create and has a contribution to the development of Hong Kong. So he deserves something better when he was in his old age.
Ho said there is now a 3-pronged plan to supply more housing, which includes speeding up the construction, making better use of technology, and the adoption of the people-centric design. Ho added that the task force on public housing has been working since the first week of taking office.
We start working on the 6th of July, which is like the third working day. Right. And from that on, we already have 4 to 5 meetings, and with a lot of colleagues from different bureaus and departments joining, because housing supply is not just the problem of one bureau. We need the collaboration with many parties.
Ho said the government is still keeping the 70-30 ratio for the supply of public and private housing, the same as that under the previous administration.
Recent reports suggested some local students had harassed their mainland counterparts at a University of Hong Kong residential hall. Today, petitioners gathered outside the headquarters of the police force and the government, calling for law enforcement actions to tackle the problem. 3 local students at the University of Hong Kong who stayed at the R.C. Lee Hall allegedly banged on the doors of 2 mainland students living in the same residential hall. They also shouted, "Hong Kong welcomes you," and "Come outside and play" in Putonghua. 2 of the local students have since been expelled permanently from the hall, with another being banned from staying there for 1 term. The group Politics Social Strategic reported the case to the police and said the students' behavior was in violation of the Sex Discrimination Ordinance and other laws. It asked for more stringent penalties against the students. Another group submitted a petition to the Education Bureau, urging the authorities to investigate the case. That's the news. Thanks for watching.